For 6 days straight, Marcus Webb's goats refused to leave a pile of red rocks at the edge of his high desert property. They pawed at the stones until their hooves bled. They screamed at the ground like something underneath was screaming back. When Marcus finally moved the rocks himself, what he uncovered wasn't a den or a burrow or a vein of minerals. It was a wall, and that wall was covered in symbols that no one, not even the experts who came running, had ever seen before. If you enjoy stories where the truth turns out to be stranger than anyone expected, stick around, because this one only gets more unbelievable from here. Marcus had lived on the same 40 acres outside a small town in northern New Mexico for almost 20 years. He raised goats for milk and cheese, sold at the local farmers market on weekends, and kept mostly to himself. His land backed up against a stretch of high desert scrubland that nobody wanted, dry, rocky, useless for farming. He'd bought it cheap specifically because nobody else did, and for 2 decades, that decision had never once bothered him. His herd of 22 goats knew the property better than he did. They had their favorite grazing spots, their favorite shade trees, their favorite patches of scrub brush along the eastern fence line. For 19 years, their routine had barely changed from one season to the next. That made it easy for Marcus to notice the moment something did. It started with Daisy, his oldest doe, refusing to come in for evening feeding. Marcus found her near a low outcrop of reddish rock at the far edge of the property, a spot the goats had always ignored because there was nothing to graze on there, not even weeds. She was pawing at the ground with one front hoof, over and over, always in the exact same spot, like she was trying to dig through solid stone with sheer stubbornness. He assumed she was after a burrowing animal, a ground squirrel, or a snake denning up for the season, and left her to it. But the next morning, 3 more goats had joined her at the same outcrop. By the following afternoon, half the herd was clustered around that spot, taking turns pawing and butting at a specific cluster of rocks, while the rest of the herd grazed like nothing was wrong. Marcus walked out to inspect it himself, half expecting to find a rattlesnake den or a coyote hole. The rocks in question weren't unusual, reddish sandstone typical of the region, half buried in dry, compacted soil. He crouched down and ran his hand over the surface, checked underneath a few loose stones, and found nothing. No burrow, no animal smell, no obvious reason at all why 22 goats would suddenly care about a patch of ground they'd walked past without a second glance for 19 years. He shooed them off and figured it was a passing obsession, the kind of strange behavior animals sometimes fall into for a day or two, and then abandon completely. He'd seen goats fixate on odd things before: a new smell, a shiny object, a change in the wind. This felt different, but he told himself it wasn't. It didn't pass. By the end of the week, the goats weren't just pawing anymore. They were ramming the rocks with their heads, backing up several feet and charging like the stones had personally wronged them. Marcus found blood on 2 of the animals' foreheads one morning, and a hoof cracked clean down the center on a third. He separated the injured goats and penned them near the barn, well away from the outcrop, assuming distance alone would break whatever fixation had taken hold. By that evening, both goats had pushed through a section of fence he'd repaired only a month earlier and were back at the rock pile, digging harder than before. Marcus tried the obvious fix next. He spent a full day building a reinforced fence around the outcrop using metal T-posts driven deep and field wire pulled tight, the same setup he used to keep goats out of his vegetable garden every summer, without fail. It had never let him down before. This time, he came out the next morning to find the fence completely flattened, posts bent at the base like something had thrown its full weight against them repeatedly, and the goats right back at the rocks, digging with a kind of frantic, single-minded focus he had never witnessed from any animal on his property in 19 years of ranching. He called his neighbor, a rancher named Pete Alvarez, who had worked that stretch of land his entire life and knew the local terrain better than anyone Marcus had ever met. Pete drove over that same afternoon, took one look at the goats slamming their heads into sandstone, and admitted flatly that he had no idea what was going on. He crouched down and ran his hand over the exposed rock himself, checking for anything sharp, anything that smelled off, anything that might explain the fixation. Nothing. It was just rock, sun-baked and unremarkable. Pete floated a theory. Maybe there was a mineral seam underneath, something goats could smell but humans couldn't detect at all. It wouldn't be the first time livestock had sniffed out a salt deposit or a vein of some trace element buried a few feet down. Ranchers around here had stories about it going back generations. It was a reasonable guess, and for a day or two, Marcus let himself believe it, because the alternative explanations were starting to feel unsettling in a way he didn't want to name out loud. He called out a large animal veterinarian to rule out anything medical first, in case the goats themselves were the actual problem, rather than whatever was buried in the ground. Dr. Rene Castillo spent the better part of a morning examining the entire herd one by one, checking their eyes, their gait, listening to their hearts, drawing blood to test for toxins, parasites, and infection. Every result came back completely clean. Whatever was pulling 22 goats to that one specific outcrop of rock, it wasn't coming from inside their bodies, and it wasn't anything she could treat with medicine. That left the ground itself. Marcus decided to dig it out on his own, thinking he'd find whatever mineral or buried carcass or mystery substance was driving the herd crazy and be done with the whole ordeal by dinner. He grabbed a pick and shovel from the barn and started clearing rock and hard-packed soil away from the spot where the goats concentrated their attention most. 2 feet down, his shovel hit something that wasn't rock and wasn't dirt either. It made a flat, hollow sound, almost like knocking on a door. He dropped to his knees and started clearing the dirt away with his bare hands, pulse quickening for reasons he couldn't quite explain to himself. What emerged from the soil wasn't a boulder or a tangle of roots. It was a flat, worked surface, smoother than anything natural had any business being, with faint grooves cut into it in a pattern that repeated every few inches in careful, deliberate lines. Marcus brushed away more dirt and watched the pattern continue, row after row of small carved marks. Nothing like natural weathering, nothing like erosion, nothing that could have happened by accident. Someone had made this, on purpose, a long time ago. He sat back on his heels, staring at it, while the goats crowded around him, still pawing at the exposed edges, like they were trying to help him dig faster, like they'd been waiting for a human to finally understand. For the first time since this whole thing started, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind cutting across the scrubland. He called Pete back out, and this time Pete brought his phone and started snapping pictures from every angle, hands slightly unsteady. Neither man knew exactly what they were looking at, but they both agreed on one thing, without needing to say it aloud. It didn't belong to anyone currently living, and it hadn't been placed there recently. The carvings looked old, weathered in a way that suggested decades at an absolute minimum, possibly far longer than either of them could reasonably guess. Pete suggested calling someone official before they touched anything else. Marcus reached out to the local historical society first, mostly because their number was the only one he could find quickly on a Sunday afternoon. A volunteer there took one look at the photos he texted over and forwarded them immediately to a contact at the State University 2 hours south, a professor of southwestern archaeology named Dr. Adrian Foss. Foss called Marcus back within the hour, which told Marcus something serious was happening even before the man on the other end of the line said a single word about it. Dr. Foss and a small research team arrived 2 days later, with equipment Marcus had only ever seen on television. Ground-penetrating radar mounted on a small cart, brushes finer than anything in his own toolbox, and a portable canopy to shade the site from the relentless desert sun. The goats, oddly, calmed down almost the moment professional digging resumed in earnest, as if their job of alerting someone had finally, mercifully, been completed. The radar results came back within hours, and Dr. Foss went quiet in a way that made Marcus genuinely nervous. The scan showed that the worked stone surface wasn't an isolated slab dropped or dumped there. It was the exposed edge of something far larger, a structure extending at least 60 feet beneath the outcrop, with what appeared to be multiple interior chambers, connected by a network of narrow passages, some of them running well beyond the boundary of Marcus's own property line. Excavation began in earnest the following week, funded on an emergency basis once word reached the state archaeology office, and a preliminary report landed on the right desk. Marcus watched from a folding chair at the edge of his own land as strangers in wide-brimmed hats carefully peeled back centuries of soil from what had, until recently, just been a useless patch of scrubland he'd bought 30 years ago because nobody else wanted it. What they found over the following month didn't match anything already sitting in the established record for the region. The known cultures who had lived in that part of New Mexico, going back thousands of years, left behind distinct, well-documented styles of pottery, distinct methods of stone construction, distinct symbols carved into rock faces across the state. The team spent days comparing the carvings from Marcus's land against every cataloged style in the university's archive. None of them matched, not closely and not loosely either. The construction technique raised even more questions than the symbols did. The stone had been cut and fitted with a precision that seemed to predate the tools typically associated with the region's known early inhabitants, joints so tight in places that a knife blade couldn't slide between the blocks. Dr. Foss brought in 2 additional specialists from out of state to double-check his team's own findings, and both, working independently and without comparing notes beforehand, reached the same unsettling conclusion. This didn't look like an extension or a variation of any known culture. It looked like something entirely separate, something the historical record had simply never accounted for, in a location nobody had ever thought to look. Carbon dating on organic material recovered from inside the first fully excavated chamber pushed the age back further than anyone on the team had expected going in, old enough that Dr. Foss reportedly asked the lab to rerun the samples a second time, assuming there had to be an error somewhere in the process. The second batch of results came back, matching the first almost exactly. Not everyone in the academic world was convinced right away. A handful of researchers who reviewed the early photographs online argued the marks could simply be unusual, natural fracture patterns in the sandstone, a phenomenon documented at a few other sites across the Southwest. Dr. Foss welcomed the skepticism publicly and invited 2 of the loudest critics to visit the site in person before drawing conclusions from a screen. Both flew out within the week. Both left the site 3 days later without a counter-argument, unwilling to put their names behind the fracture theory once they'd examined the tool marks under magnification themselves. Word of the discovery spread slowly at first, contained mostly to cautious emails and quiet phone calls between academics, nobody willing to make a public claim before the physical evidence was airtight enough to survive scrutiny. But 3 weeks into full excavation, the team uncovered something that made staying quiet impossible. A sealed inner chamber, smaller than the others surrounding it, containing objects that had clearly been placed there deliberately, rather than lost, discarded, or swept in by centuries of shifting soil. Carved figurines, no two exactly alike, fragments of a material the team couldn't immediately identify using standard field tests. And more of the strange marks, denser here than anywhere else in the complex, arranged in tight structured rows that some members of the team believed weren't decorative at all, but something closer to writing. If that turns out to be true, it would mean a written language belonging to a civilization that, until a herd of goats started headbutting a rock pile on a small ranch in northern New Mexico, nobody currently alive had any reason to believe ever existed at all. Marcus still keeps his goats on the property, though the herd is no longer allowed anywhere near the active dig site, partly for their own safety around the open excavation trenches, and partly to protect the integrity of a site that researchers now describe, carefully, as one of the more significant unexplained finds in the region in decades. He's been offered money by more than one outlet to tell his story on camera, and he's turned most of them down so far, still trying to quietly process the fact that his land, the cheap, unwanted plot he bought because nobody else would touch it, might be sitting on top of a piece of human history that no textbook, no museum, and no professor anywhere had ever documented before. His goats found it first. Dr. Foss and his team believe they've only uncovered a small fraction of what's actually down there. The ground-penetrating radar has already picked up additional structures, extending well beyond the boundary of Marcus's own 40 acres, underneath land he doesn't own and has no legal right to excavate without permission he hasn't yet been able to secure from the neighboring property holders. Whatever built those chambers, whoever carved those symbols into stone by hand, and then deliberately sealed them away in a room meant never to be reopened, left behind far more than a single buried wall. And somewhere beneath the quiet New Mexico scrubland, past the edge of the current dig site, past the fences and the folding chairs and the careful brushes, undocumented passages are still sitting exactly where they were left, sealed in the dark, waiting for someone or something to find them again.